The clock on my phone blinked 11:47 p.m., its faint glow casting a pale light across the cluttered surface of my desk. Papers were strewn haphazardly, notes from work that I'd promised myself I'd organize tomorrow but knew deep down would still be there by the end of the week. My laptop sat open, its screen dark now, though only moments ago it had been filled with spreadsheets and emails demanding attention. The room was quiet save for the rhythmic hum of the ceiling fan above me, its blades slicing through the warm night air like a metronome counting out the seconds until something shifted. I leaned back in my chair, letting out a long sigh as I pressed the heels of my hands against my eyes. It had been one of those days, a relentless churn of deadlines and half-hearted small talk with coworkers whose names I could barely remember. Not that they cared much about mine either. I was just another face in the office, another cog in the machine. Sometimes I wondered if anyone would even notice if I didn't show up tomorrow. But tonight wasn't about self-pity or existential dread. Tonight was supposed to be simple. Finish some lingering tasks, maybe scroll mindlessly through social media for an hour, and then crawl into bed before midnight hit. A rare moment of peace after weeks of chaos. At least, that's what I told myself when I locked the door behind me earlier this evening. My roommate, Clara, had other plans. She burst into the living room without knocking, her presence immediately filling the space with an energy I hadn't realized I'd been missing. Her hair was damp from the shower, curling slightly at the ends where it brushed against her shoulders, and she wore nothing but an oversized t-shirt that hung loosely off one shoulder. She carried 2 steaming mugs, one in each hand, and a mischievous grin that made my stomach twist in ways I tried not to acknowledge. "You're still awake," she said, more statement than question, setting the mugs down on the coffee table with a soft clink. "Thought you'd be passed out by now." "I could say the same about you," I replied, trying to keep my tone light despite the way my pulse quickened at the sight of her bare legs beneath the hem of her shirt. Clara shrugged, dropping onto the couch beside me with a grace that seemed almost effortless. "Couldn't sleep. Figured we could use a little pick-me-up." She nudged one of the mugs toward me, steam spiraling upward in delicate wisps. "Hot chocolate. Extra marshmallows." I hesitated, glancing between her and the mug. There was something disarmingly intimate about sharing late-night drinks like this, especially when neither of us had planned for it. We weren't exactly strangers. We'd lived together for nearly 2 years now, but lately, things had felt different. More charged. Like every glance lingered too long, every accidental brush of our fingers sent sparks ricocheting through my chest. "Thanks," I murmured finally, reaching for the mug. My fingers grazed hers briefly as she let go, and I swore I saw her flinch, though she quickly masked it with a laugh. "No problem. You looked like you needed it." Her words hung in the air between us, layered with meaning I wasn't sure how to unpack. Did she mean the hot chocolate? Or something else entirely? We sat in silence for a while, sipping our drinks and listening to the faint creaks of the old buildings settling around us. Outside, the city buzzed faintly, the distant wail of a siren, the occasional honk of a car horn, but inside, it was just us. Just me and Clara, alone in the dimly lit room, the tension between us thick enough to cut with a knife. It wasn't always like this. When we first moved in together, everything had been so easy, comfortable. We joked about splitting chores, debated over whose turn it was to buy groceries, and bickered good-naturedly about which Netflix shows to binge-watch. She was my friend, my confidant, the person who understood exactly how much creamer to put in my coffee without asking. But somewhere along the way, the lines began to blur. Conversations grew heavier, loaded with subtext I couldn't ignore. And then there were the looks, the ones that lingered just a second too long, the ones that left me wondering if she felt it too. So, Clara broke the silence, her voice soft but deliberate. "How was your day?" I glanced at her, surprised by the sudden shift in tone. Normally, she avoided these kinds of questions, preferring to keep things light and superficial. But tonight, her gaze was steady, searching, as if she needed to know the answer. "It was fine," I lied, shrugging nonchalantly. "Same old stuff." "Yours." She tilted her head, studying me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. "Not bad." Just thinking a lot, I guess.
About what?
The question slipped out before I could stop it, and I immediately regretted it. Whatever wall she'd been building between us tonight, I just knocked it down. Clara hesitated, her lips parting as if she were weighing her next words carefully. For a moment, I thought she might deflect, change the subject, retreat back into the safety of small talk. Instead, she leaned closer, her knee brushing against mine. About you, she admitted softly, her breath warm against my cheek. Time froze. The mug in my hands suddenly felt impossibly heavy, threatening to slip from my grasp. My heart pounded in my ears, drowning out the hum of the fan, the distant sounds of the city outside. All I could focus on was her scent, faintly floral with a hint of vanilla. Her eyes, wide and searching, daring me to look away, her lips, parted ever so slightly as if waiting for mine to meet them. What do you mean? I whispered, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to steady it. Clara didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached out, her fingertips grazing the back of my hand. The touch was featherlight, barely there, yet it sent shockwaves coursing through my body. I mean, she started, her voice barely audible, I can't stop thinking about you. And just like that, the dam broke. Every emotion I'd been suppressing for months came rushing to the surface. All the longing, the guilt, the fear, the desire. I wanted to pull away, to tell her this was a mistake, that we shouldn't cross this line. But I couldn't, because deep down, I knew it was already too late. Before I could respond, Clara closed the distance between us, her lips meeting mine in a kiss that was both hesitant and desperate. It was soft at first, tentative, as if she were afraid I'd push her away. But when I didn't, when I kissed her back with equal fervor, she deepened it, her hand sliding up to cup my jaw, her thumb tracing gentle circles against my skin. The world around us dissolved, leaving only the two of us in this moment. Everything else, the deadlines, the doubts, the fears, it all faded into the background, replaced by the heat of her touch, the taste of her lips, the undeniable connection that had been simmering beneath the surface for far too long. When we finally pulled apart, both of us breathless and flushed, Clara rested her forehead against mine, her eyes searching mine once more. "Tell me to stop," she whispered, her voice trembling. "If you don't want this, tell me now." But I couldn't, because for the first time in what felt like forever, I wanted something, not because I thought I should or because it was convenient, but because it felt real.
Raw.
True, S.O. Instead of speaking, I kissed her again, sealing whatever unspoken promise had been hanging between us all along. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the cracks in the blinds, painting faint golden streaks across the room. My eyes fluttered open reluctantly, heavy with sleep and something else, something I couldn't quite name yet. For a moment, I lay there, disoriented, as my mind struggled to piece together the fragments of last night. And then it hit me. Clara, her name echoed in my thoughts like a whispered confession, sending a jolt of awareness coursing through my body. I turned my head slowly, half expecting her to be lying beside me, but the other side of the bed was empty, the sheets cool to the touch. A pang of disappointment, or maybe relief, settled in my chest. Had she left already? Or had she never stayed at all? Sitting up, I pulled the blanket tighter around myself, suddenly aware of how exposed I felt, not just physically, but emotionally. Last night hadn't been some fleeting moment of weakness. It had been raw, real, and undeniable. Every kiss, every touch, every word exchanged between us had carried a weight that I wasn't sure either of us was ready to bear. But now, in the cold light of morning, doubt crept in. What did this mean for us? Were we crossing a line we couldn't uncross? What if things got complicated? What if they already were? I shook my head, trying to silence the relentless barrage of questions. This wasn't the time for overthinking, it was barely dawn. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed. Pushing myself out of bed, I padded softly toward the kitchen, drawn by the faint aroma of coffee brewing. Sure enough, Clara was there, standing by the counter in her pajamas, her back to me as she poured herself a cup. She looked normal, like nothing extraordinary had happened just hours ago. like we hadn't spent the night unraveling years of carefully constructed boundaries. "Hey," I said quietly, my voice rough from sleep. She turned, startled, and for a split second, our eyes locked. There was no mistaking the flicker of uncertainty in hers. It mirrored my own. But then she smiled, soft and tentative, and the tension eased ever so slightly. "Morning," she replied, holding up the coffee pot. "Want some?" I nodded, moving closer but keeping a cautious distance. It wasn't that I didn't want to be near her, it was more that I wasn't sure how to be near her anymore. Everything felt different now, charged with an undercurrent of intimacy that neither of us seemed willing to address directly. "Thanks," I murmured, accepting the mug she handed me. The warmth seeped into my palms, grounding me in the present moment. We stood there in silence for a while, sipping our coffee and pretending not to notice the way the air between us crackled with unspoken words. Finally, Clara broke the quiet. "So," she began, her tone deliberately casual, though I could hear the nervous edge beneath it. "About last night," my stomach clenched. Here it was, the conversation I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. Part of me wanted to run, to avoid facing whatever truths might come spilling out. But another part, a stronger, braver part, knew we couldn't keep dancing around this forever. "What about it?" I asked, forcing my voice to remain steady despite the storm raging inside me. Clara hesitated, setting her mug down on the counter before turning to face me fully. Her expression was guarded, but there was vulnerability in her eyes that made my heart ache. "I don't regret it," she said finally, her words tumbling out in a rush. I need to know where we stand. Because I can't go back to the way things were before, not after that." Her honesty caught me off guard, leaving me momentarily speechless. I wanted to tell her I felt the same, that I didn't want to lose what we had, but how could I when I wasn't even sure what this was yet? "I don't know," I admitted softly, lowering my gaze. "I don't know where we stand either. All I know is that last night meant something to me. Something big." Clara's shoulders relaxed slightly, as if hearing those words had lifted some invisible weight from them. She reached out, her fingers brushing against mine in a gesture that was both comforting and electrifying. "Then let's figure it out together," she said, her voice firm but gentle. "Whatever happens next, we'll handle it. Together." It was such a simple statement, yet it carried so much promise and so much risk. Could we really navigate this without losing ourselves or each other? In the process, for now though, I chose to believe her. To trust that whatever lay ahead, we'd face it side by side. Over the next few days, life settled into an uneasy rhythm. On the surface, things appeared normal. We cooked meals together, watched TV, joked about mundane things like laundry detergent brands. But beneath the facade, everything was different. Every glance, every accidental brush of hands, every lingering hug held new meaning, and then there were the moments when the mask slipped entirely. One evening, as we sat on the couch watching a movie neither of us was particularly invested in, Clara leaned into me, resting her head on my shoulder. It was such a small, seemingly innocent gesture, but it sent my pulse racing all the same. Without thinking, I wrapped my arm around her, pulling her closer. "This feels nice," she murmured, her voice muffled against my neck. "It does," I agreed, tightening my hold on her ever so slightly. In that moment, surrounded by the familiar comfort of our shared space, it was easy to forget the complications waiting just beyond the horizon. Easy to pretend that we weren't tiptoeing along the edge of something profound and terrifying. But reality has a way of intruding, no matter how hard you try to ignore. A week later, I found myself sitting across from my best friend, Mia, at our favorite cafe. We hadn't seen each other in weeks due to conflicting schedules, and I'd been looking forward to catching up. What I hadn't anticipated was the flood of guilt that washed over me as soon as she asked how things were going with Clara. "Fine," I lied, stirring my latte absent-mindedly. Same old, same old." Mia raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. "You're a terrible liar, you know that?"
Spill.
"What's really going on?" I hesitated, torn between wanting to confide in her and fearing her judgment. Mia had always been supportive, but this was different. Complicated. Things are changing, I admitted finally, choosing my words carefully. Between me and Clara. Her eyes widened in surprise. Changing how? I sighed, running a hand through my hair. I don't even know where to start. It's like we crossed this invisible line, and now everything feels different. Closer. More intense. Mia studied me for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. Are you happy? The question caught me off guard. Was I happy? Yes, in many ways. Being with Clara, even in this uncertain, undefined state, felt right in a way I couldn't explain. But it also scared me. I think so, I said slowly. But it's complicated. She nodded, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. Love usually is. Just be careful, okay? Make sure you're doing this for the right reasons, for both your sakes. Her advice lingered in my mind long after we parted ways, weighing heavily on my conscience. Was I being selfish, pursuing something that could potentially hurt us both? Or was I finally allowing myself to embrace what I truly wanted, consequences be damned? As the weeks passed, the tension between Clara and me grew unbearable. We were caught in a limbo of sorts, too afraid to fully commit, yet unable to return to the simplicity of our former dynamic. It came to a head one rainy afternoon when we found ourselves alone in the apartment, the sound of raindrops tapping against the windows amplifying the heaviness in the air. We can't keep doing this, Clara blurted out suddenly, pacing the length of the living room. This dance. It's driving me crazy. I stared at her, stunned by the vehemence in her voice. What do you want me to say, Clara? That I have all the answers? Because I don't. I'm not asking for answers, she shot back, stopping mid-stride to face me. I'm asking for honesty. For you to admit that you feel it too, that pull between us. That connection. Of course I feel it. I snapped, my frustration boiling over. But feeling something doesn't make it easy, or simple, or safe. What if we mess this up? What if we ruin everything? Clara stepped closer, her eyes blazing with determination. And what if we don't? What if this is exactly what we've been missing all along? Her words struck a chord deep within me, resonating with a truth I'd been too afraid to acknowledge. Maybe she was right. Maybe it was time to stop running from what we both wanted and start fighting for it instead. Taking a deep breath, I closed the distance between us, cupping her face in my hands. Okay, I whispered, my voice trembling with emotion. Let's do this. Let's see where it takes us. Clara's lips curved into a smile, bright and hopeful despite the tears glistening in her eyes. Together, she promised, pulling me into a kiss that sealed our unspoken vow, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, we could make this work. The days that followed our decision to move forward were a whirlwind of emotions, equal parts exhilaration and terror. Every moment with Clara felt like walking a tightrope, balancing the thrill of newfound intimacy against the fear of falling. We hadn't put a label on what we were doing, not yet, but it was clear that something had shifted irrevocably between us. The air crackled with unspoken promises, and every touch carried the weight of meaning neither of us dared articulate aloud. But as much as I wanted to lose myself in this new chapter with Clara, reality refused to be ignored. Living together added layers of complexity we couldn't escape. Our shared space became both a sanctuary and a minefield, where even mundane tasks like washing dishes or folding laundry took on an undercurrent of tension. It wasn't just about navigating our feelings for each other. It was about figuring out how to coexist without letting those feelings consume us entirely. And then there was the matter of secrecy. It started innocuously enough. A glance exchanged across the dinner table when friends came over, a hand brushing too long while passing the salt. At first, these moments seemed harmless, almost playful. But as time went on, they grew harder to ignore. Each slip-up felt like a betrayal, not of trust, but of the fragile boundary we'd erected around our relationship. One evening, after a particularly awkward dinner party with some mutual acquaintances, Clara cornered me in the kitchen as soon as everyone left. "You need to stop looking at me like that," she hissed, her voice low but sharp. "Like what?" I asked, feigning innocence though my cheeks burned with guilt. Like you want to kiss me in front of everyone, she snapped, slamming a plate onto the counter. Do you have any idea how hard it is to act normal when all I can think about is? She trailed off, shaking her head as if trying to banish the thought. I'm sorry, I said quickly, stepping closer despite the warning in her tone. I didn't mean to make things weird. It's not about making things weird, she shot back, her frustration giving way to something softer, something vulnerable. It's about protecting us. If people find out, she didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. The implications hung heavy in the air between us. What would happen if someone discovered our secret? Would they judge us? Misunderstand us? Worse yet, would they try to tear us apart? I know, I murmured, reaching out to take her hand. I'll be more careful. I promise. Clara sighed, leaning into my touch despite her earlier anger. It's not just you, okay? I slip up too. I hate having to hide this part of us. It feels wrong. Her words struck a chord deep within me. Hiding who we were, to ourselves and to the world, was exhausting. But for now, it felt necessary. Necessary to protect what we had. Necessary to give ourselves time to figure out exactly what this meant before inviting scrutiny from others. Still, the burden of secrecy weighed heavily on both of us. Our first real fight came unexpectedly, sparked by something so trivial it almost felt absurd. It was a Saturday morning, and we were grocery shopping together, a routine task that had somehow become one of my favorite ways to spend time with Clara. We wandered the aisles, debating over which brand of cereal to buy and whether we needed another bottle of wine. Everything seemed fine, until it wasn't. Standing in front of the produce section, Clara held up 2 bags of apples, frowning as she compared them. These are cheaper, she said, holding up the generic brand. But these are organic, I countered, gesturing to the pricier option. So, organic doesn't mean better. It just means more expensive. It means no pesticides, I argued, crossing my arms. Clara rolled her eyes, tossing the generic apples into the cart. Whatever. Let's go. And just like that, the tension simmered beneath the surface erupted. What's your problem? I demanded, following her down the aisle. My problem, she shot back, stopping abruptly to face me. You're being ridiculous. It's apples, Harper. Not life or death. It's not about the apples. I snapped, my voice rising despite my best efforts to stay calm. It's about you dismissing everything I say like it doesn't matter. Clara stared at me, stunned by the sudden escalation. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the hum of fluorescent lights overhead filling the silence. Then, in a quieter but no less cutting tone, she replied, maybe if you stopped overreacting to every little thing, we wouldn't have this problem. Her words hit like a slap, leaving me reeling. Without thinking, I turned on my heel and stormed toward the exit, abandoning the cart, and her, behind, by the time I got home. My anger had dissolved into shame. How had such a small disagreement spiraled so quickly out of control? Was this what relationships did? Turn minor annoyances into major battles? Or was it something deeper, something unresolved between us that we hadn't addressed? When Clara walked through the door an hour later, her expression was guarded but contrite. She set the groceries down on the counter without a word, avoiding eye contact as she began unpacking them. I'm sorry, I said finally, breaking the silence. Clara paused, her hands hovering over a bag of carrots. Me too. We stood there for a moment, the weight of unspoken apologies hanging between us. Finally, she turned to face me, her eyes searching mine. This isn't just about apples, is it? She asked softly. No, I admitted, shaking my head. It's about everything. The hiding, the pretending, the constant worry that we're going to mess this up. It's exhausting, Clara. And sometimes I don't know how much longer I can keep doing it. Her shoulders sagged, as if hearing my confession had drained her of energy. I feel it too, she admitted. Every day. But running away won't fix it. Neither will fighting. I know, I said, moving closer until I could take her hands in mine. I don't want to fight anymore. I need you to understand how hard this is for me. For us. Clara nodded, squeezing my fingers gently. I do understand. And I'm scared too. But we can't let fear dictate how we live, Harper. Not if we want this to work. Her words resonated deeply, reminding me of why I'd fallen for her in the first place. Clara had always been the brave one, the one willing to take risks, to push boundaries, to embrace uncertainty. Maybe it was time I learned to do the same. That night, as we lay tangled together in bed, I made a decision. We should tell someone, I said suddenly, my voice barely above a whisper. Clara stiffened beside me, her breathing hitching slightly. What? Not everyone, I clarified quickly. Just someone. Someone we trust. Keeping this to ourselves is tearing us apart, Clara. We deserve better than that. For a long moment, she was silent, her thoughts swirling visibly behind her wide, searching eyes. Then slowly she nodded. Okay, she said softly. Let's do it. Together. Relief washed over me, mingling with a fresh wave of apprehension. Telling someone, even one person, meant opening ourselves up to judgment, misunderstanding, maybe even rejection. But it also meant taking a step toward authenticity, toward claiming our truth instead of hiding from it. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. The decision to tell someone about us felt monumental, like standing at the edge of a cliff and preparing to jump. It wasn't just about revealing our relationship, it was about stepping into uncharted territory, exposing ourselves to judgment, curiosity, or even rejection. But as daunting as it was, I couldn't shake the sense that this was necessary. Necessary for us to grow. Necessary for us to breathe. Still, deciding who to tell was another hurdle altogether. Clara and I spent hours debating who would be the safest choice. Someone supportive but discreet. Someone who wouldn't broadcast our secret before we were ready. Eventually, we settled on Mia. She'd been my best friend since college, and though she could be brutally honest at times, her loyalty was unwavering. If anyone could handle this revelation with grace and understanding, it was her. Are you sure about this? Clara asked one evening as we sat side by side on the couch, drafting a mental script for how the conversation might go. No, I admitted, twisting a strand of hair around my finger nervously. But I think she'll understand. And if she doesn't, well, at least we tried. Clara nodded, though her expression remained uneasy. What if she tells other people? Or worse, what if she tries to talk us out of it? I don't think she will, I said firmly, though doubt lingered in the back of my mind. Mia's always been there for me, no matter what. Even when I screw up royally, which, let's face it, happens more often than not. Clara chuckled softly, nudging me with her shoulder. You don't screw up that much, says the person who stormed out of a grocery store because of apples, I teased, earning a playful glare in return. Okay, fair point, she conceded with a sheepish grin. But seriously, are you ready for this? Once we tell her, there's no going back. I took a deep breath, letting the gravity of her words sink in. She was right. This wasn't just a casual confession, it was a declaration, a commitment to being open and honest about who we were, both individually and together. I'm ready, I said finally, meeting her gaze. We're ready. We invited Mia over for coffee the following Sunday afternoon, framing it as a casual catch-up session. On the surface, everything seemed normal. She arrived with her usual cheerful energy, bringing along a box of pastries and a bottle of wine for later. We chatted about work, mutual friends, and the latest Netflix obsession, all while I struggled to keep my nerves in check. Finally, after Mia had settled onto the couch with a second cup of coffee, I exchanged a glance with Clara. She gave me an encouraging nod, silently reminding me that we were in this together. So, I began, my voice trembling slightly despite my best efforts to sound casual. There's something we need to tell you. Mia raised an eyebrow, setting her mug down on the coffee table. Oh, this sounds serious. It is, Clara interjected, her tone steady but tinged with apprehension. But please hear us out before you say anything. Mia leaned forward, her curiosity piqued. All right, shoot. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding in my chest. Clara and I, we've been seeing each other. Romantically. For a moment, silence filled the room. Mia stared at us, her expression unreadable, and I braced myself for the worst. Would she laugh?
Cry?
Walk out? Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face. Well, it's about damn time, she said, shaking her head in mock exasperation. What? I blurted out, caught off guard by her reaction. You heard me, Mia replied, leaning back against the couch with a satisfied smirk. I've been waiting for this moment for years. Clara and I exchanged stunned glances, unsure whether to laugh or cry. You knew? Clara asked incredulously. Of course I knew, Mia exclaimed, rolling her eyes. Do you really think I didn't notice the way you two look at each other? Or how every conversation between you feels like some kind of secret code only you understand?
Please.
You're not exactly subtle. Heat rushed to my cheeks as I processed her words. Had we really been so obvious? But why didn't you say anything? I pressed, still reeling from the revelation. Because it wasn't my place to say anything, Mia explained gently. This is your journey, not mine. All I ever wanted was for you both to be happy, and if being together makes you happy, then who am I to judge? Her acceptance hit me like a wave, washing away weeks of anxiety and self-doubt. For the first time since this whole thing began, I felt a flicker of hope, not just for Clara and me, but for the possibility that others might see us the same way Mia did, as two people simply trying to love each other. After the initial shock wore off, the three of us spent the rest of the afternoon talking, really talking about everything. Mia peppered us with questions, her curiosity genuine and free of judgment. How long had we been feeling this way? What made us decide to take the leap? Did we have any plans for telling other people? We're taking it slow, Clara clarified, glancing at me for confirmation. One step at a time. Smart move, Mia agreed, nodding approvingly. Not everyone's going to react the way I did, so pace yourselves. And remember, you don't owe anyone an explanation unless you want to give one. Her advice resonated deeply, reinforcing the importance of moving forward on our own terms. Still, I couldn't help but wonder how others would respond once they found out. Would they accept us as readily as Mia had? Or would they question, criticize, or distance themselves as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting warm hues of orange and pink through the windows? Mia stood to leave. Before heading out, she pulled me aside for a private moment. You're doing the right thing, she whispered, squeezing my hand reassuringly. Love isn't easy, Harper, but it's worth fighting for. Don't let fear stop you from living authentically. Her words stayed with me long after she left, echoing in my mind like a mantra. In the days that followed, Clara and I found ourselves lighter somehow, as if sharing our truth with Mia had lifted a weight we hadn't realized we'd been carrying. We weren't naive enough to think that every revelation would go as smoothly, but knowing that at least one person supported us unconditionally gave us strength, and yet, the road ahead remained uncertain. Telling Mia was just the first step. There were still coworkers, family members, and friends whose reactions we couldn't predict. Each disclosure would require courage, vulnerability, and trust, not just in others but in ourselves. But for now, we focused on the present, on building a foundation strong enough to withstand whatever challenges lay ahead, on cherishing the moments we shared without fear of discovery or disapproval. One night, as we lay curled up together under the covers, Clara traced gentle patterns along my arm, her touch sending shivers down my spine. What are you thinking about? She murmured, her voice soft and sleepy. Us, I replied honestly. Where we've been, where we're going. She smiled, pressing a kiss to my shoulder. No matter what happens, we'll figure it out. Together. Her certainty filled me with a quiet confidence, a belief that no matter how difficult the journey became, we'd find a way to navigate it side by side, because love, I realized, wasn't about having all the answers. It was about trusting the process, trusting each other, and most importantly, trusting ourselves. Telling Mia had been a revelation, a moment of clarity and validation that left us feeling lighter, freer. But as the days turned into weeks, reality began to settle in again, bringing with it a new set of challenges. Sharing our truth with one person didn't erase the weight of secrecy entirely. It merely shifted its shape. Now, instead of hiding from everyone, we were hiding from almost everyone. And while that distinction might have seemed small on paper, in practice, it loomed large. Every interaction outside the safety of our apartment felt like walking a tightrope. At work, at social gatherings, even during casual encounters with neighbors, every glance, every word, every gesture carried the potential to expose what we'd worked so hard to protect. The fear of discovery was exhausting, but perhaps more draining was the guilt that accompanied it. Guilt for lying by omission. Guilt for pretending to be something we weren't. Guilt for keeping this part of ourselves locked away, hidden from the people who mattered most. It happened during a family dinner, a rare occasion where Clara's parents joined us for a meal at her childhood home. Her mother, always warm and effusive, greeted me with an enthusiastic hug before ushering us inside. The house smelled of roasted chicken and fresh herbs, a comforting aroma that usually brought back fond memories of holidays past. Tonight, however, the scent only heightened my anxiety. We sat around the dining table, plates piled high with food, laughter filling the air as stories were exchanged. Clara's father regaled us with tales of his latest fishing trip, while her younger brother teased her mercilessly about some embarrassing childhood anecdote. For a while, I managed to blend into the background, nodding along and offering polite smiles when appropriate. But then, midway through dessert, Clara's mother turned to me with a question that sent my stomach plummeting. "So, Harper," she said, her tone deceptively casual, "are you seeing anyone special these days?" The room went silent, not because anyone stopped talking, but because all I could hear was the deafening roar of my own heartbeat. My fork hovered midair, suspended between my plate and my mouth, as I scrambled for a response. Beside me, Clara froze, her knuckles whitening around the stem of her wine glass. I stammered, my voice barely audible. "Not really. Work's been keeping me busy." "Oh, come now," her mother pressed, waving a hand dismissively. "Surely there must be someone catching your eye? You're such a lovely girl. You deserve happiness." Her words were kind, well-intentioned even, but they landed like daggers. Lovely girl, deserving happiness. As if those qualities somehow negated the truth of who I was, who we were. "I'm happy," I replied finally, forcing a smile that felt brittle on my lips. "Really?" Clara's mother studied me for a moment longer, her expression unreadable, before turning her attention back to the conversation. But the damage was done. The rest of the evening passed in a blur, each bite tasting like ash in my mouth. Later, as we drove home in silence, Clara reached across the console to take my hand. "I'm sorry," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "I should have warned you she might ask something like that." "It's not your fault," I said quickly, though bitterness lingered beneath my words. "But it doesn't make it any easier." "No," Clara agreed softly. "It doesn't." The cracks in our carefully constructed facade continued to widen, culminating in a moment of recklessness that neither of us saw coming. It was a Friday night, and we decided to meet up with a group of coworkers at a local bar after a particularly grueling week. The atmosphere was lively, filled with the hum of conversation and the clinking of glasses. We stuck close to each other, laughing and joking as if nothing were amiss, at least, until the music changed. A slow, sultry song came on, prompting several couples to migrate toward the makeshift dance floor. Clara glanced at me, her eyes sparkling mischievously. "Dance with me," she whispered, tugging gently on my wrist. "What? Here?" I hissed, glancing nervously at our colleagues. "Are you insane?" "Come on," she urged, her grip tightening. "No one will care. Just one song." Before I could protest further, she pulled me into the crowd, wrapping her arms loosely around my waist. For a moment, I resisted, acutely aware of the curious glances being cast our way. But then Clara leaned in, her breath warm against my ear. "Relax," she murmured. "We're just two friends having fun. No big deal." Her confidence was infectious, and slowly, reluctantly, I allowed myself to sink into the moment. Her body swayed against mine, moving in perfect sync with the rhythm of the music. Around us, the world faded away, leaving only the two of us cocooned in a bubble of warmth and connection. And then, disaster struck. One of our coworkers, a chatty marketing associate named Rachel, approached us, her brow furrowed in confusion. "Wait, are you too?" she began, trailing off as realization dawned. Clara stiffened beside me, her hands dropping to her sides.
What?
"Nothing," Rachel said quickly, holding up her hands defensively. "Never mind. Forget I said anything." But it was too late. The seed of suspicion had been planted, and no amount of denial could uproot it. By Monday morning, the office buzzed with whispers. Some were subtle, a lingering glance, a knowing smirk, while others were less discreet. During a team meeting, I caught Rachel exchanging hushed words with another colleague, their eyes darting toward Clara and me before quickly looking away. When the meeting ended, Clara cornered me in the hallway, her expression grim. "We need to talk," she said tersely, pulling me into an empty conference room. "What is it?" I asked, dread pooling in my stomach. "People know," she stated bluntly. "Or at least they suspect." My heart sank. "How many?" "Enough," she replied, running a hand through her hair in frustration. "Look, I don't think anyone's going to say anything outright. Not yet anyway, but we can't keep pretending anymore. This isn't sustainable, Harper." "I know," I admitted, sinking into a chair. "But what do you want me to do? Come out to the entire office? Risk losing my job over something that's none of their business?" Clara sighed, crouching down in front of me, so we were eye level. "I'm not saying we should broadcast it to everyone. But maybe it's time to stop hiding. Not completely, anyway. Start small. Be honest with the people who matter. Let them see us for who we are." Her words resonated deeply, stirring something within me, a longing for authenticity, for freedom from the constant charade. But the fear remained, gnawing at the edges of my resolve. What if they hate us? I whispered, voicing the fear I'd been carrying for weeks. "They won't," Clara said firmly, taking my hands in hers. "And if they do, then they weren't worth keeping in our lives anyway." Her conviction gave me strength, reminding me of why I'd fallen for her in the first place. She wasn't reckless or impulsive, she was brave, willing to face the unknown head-on, even when it terrified her. "Okay," I said finally, squeezing her fingers tightly. "Let's do it. Together." That evening, we called an emergency meeting with Mia, asking her to join us at our favorite cafe. When she arrived, her expression was wary, sensing immediately that something was wrong. "What's going on?" she asked, sliding into the booth across from us. "We messed up," Clara admitted, cutting straight to the point. "Someone at work figured it out, or at least they suspect." Word spreading. Mia's eyes widened in alarm. "How bad is it?" "Not terrible yet," I interjected. "But it's only a matter of time before things escalate." She nodded thoughtfully, tapping her fingers against the tabletop. "So, what's the plan?" "We're done hiding," Clara declared, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "We're going to start telling people, starting with those closest to us. If they can't accept us, then that's their problem, not ours." Mia studied us for a long moment, her gaze flickering between our determined faces. Finally, she smiled, a soft, encouraging smile that reminded me why she was such an integral part of our journey. "Then count me in," she said simply. "Whatever you need, I've got your backs." Her unwavering support bolstered our resolve, giving us the courage to move forward despite the uncertainty ahead. That night, as we lay tangled together in bed, Clara rested her head on my chest, her breathing slow and steady. "We'll get through this," she murmured sleepily. "I know," I replied, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Because we have each other." And for the first time in what felt like forever, I believed I'd know the truth. "We hope you can understand and support us." Her words hung in the air, filling the silence with a quiet strength that I hadn't realized I needed until now. Clara's courage gave me the resolve to keep going, even as my heart raced and my palms grew clammy. My mother was the first to break the tension. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor, and walked over to where we sat. For a moment, I braced myself for rejection, for anger or disappointment, but instead, she pulled me into a tight embrace. "Oh, sweetheart," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "I just want you to be happy." "If this is what makes you happy," her voice trailed off, but the sentiment was clear. Relief washed over me in waves, so intense it brought tears to my eyes. When she finally released me, she turned to Clara, studying her with an expression that softened from scrutiny to something resembling acceptance. "You must really care about her," my mother said, her tone more curious than accusatory. "I do," Clara replied without hesitation, her gaze unwavering. "More than anything." For the first time since we'd arrived, my father spoke again. His voice was gruff, but there was no mistaking the vulnerability beneath it. "This isn't how I imagined things turning out," he admitted, rubbing the back of his neck awkwardly. "But if you're sure about each other, then I guess that's all that matters." His words weren't perfect. They lacked the warmth and enthusiasm I might have hoped for, but they carried a weight of reluctant approval that meant more than he probably intended. The rest of the visit passed in a haze of cautious conversation and tentative smiles. My parents didn't bombard us with questions or demand explanations. Instead, they seemed content to let the revelation sink in, their reactions muted but not hostile. By the time we left, I felt drained but lighter, as though a boulder I'd been carrying for years had finally shifted, if only slightly, on the drive home. Clara reached across the console to take my hand, her touch grounding me once more. "That went better than I expected," she said softly, her voice tinged with relief. "It did," I agreed, exhaling a shaky breath. "But it's not over. They'll need time to process everything." "And so will we," Clara added, squeezing my fingers gently. She was right. Coming out to my parents wasn't the end of our journey. It was just another step forward, one that would require patience, understanding, and grace on both sides. But for now, we allowed ourselves a moment of quiet triumph, savoring the small victory before facing whatever challenges lay ahead. Words spread faster than we anticipated. Within days, whispers turned into conversations, and soon, friends and acquaintances began reaching out, some supportive, others curious, and a few openly disapproving. One particularly painful exchange came from an old college friend who accused me of ruining Clara's life, as though loving someone could ever be considered a crime. "You don't know what you're talking about," Clara snapped during a phone call, her voice sharp with anger. "Harper hasn't ruined anything. She's made my life better. If you can't see that, then maybe we shouldn't stay in touch." Hanging up afterward, she looked at me with tears glistening in her eyes. "Was that too harsh?" she asked, her voice trembling. "No," I replied firmly, pulling her into my arms. "You stood up for us. That's all that matters." Not every interaction was negative, though. Some people surprised us with their openness and acceptance. A co-worker I barely knew stopped me in the hallway one afternoon, offering a simple but heartfelt message of support. "I heard about you and Clara," she said quietly, glancing around to ensure no one else was listening. "Just wanted to say, good for you. It takes guts to live your truth." Her kindness caught me off guard, leaving me momentarily speechless. "Thank you," I managed finally, smiling despite the lump in my throat. Moments like these reminded me why we'd chosen this path, to create space for love and authenticity, even when it felt impossible. As weeks turned into months, life began to settle into a new rhythm. The initial shock of our coming out faded, replaced by a fragile sense of normalcy. Not everyone accepted us, not fully, but enough people did to make the world feel less hostile, less isolating. Clara and I continued navigating the complexities of our relationship, learning to communicate openly and lean on each other during moments of doubt. There were still hard days, of course, days when fear crept back in, whispering lies about inadequacy and rejection. But through it all, we held fast to the belief that love was worth fighting for. One evening, as we sat together on the couch watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, Clara rested her head on my shoulder, her breathing slow and steady. "We've come so far," she murmured, her voice soft with wonder. "We have," I agreed, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "But there's still more to do." More walls to tear down. She smiled, tilting her face up to meet mine. Then we'll tear them down together. And in that moment, surrounded by the warmth of her presence and the promise of tomorrow, I believed her.